Welcome to Vectorworks 2B, the continuation of the Vectorworks 101 course for first year. I'm your guest lecturer James Russell, and in today's lesson we'll be discussing the 2D basics and a bit of revision. So to begin with today, I'm just going to do a quick rundown on the basic toolset. Some of you might have forgotten, some of you might have used it in the last year or so. But just as a quick reminder, we'll just go through some of the tools up here that we're going to try and use throughout today. I'll pop it out and we'll have a look here. So, first off, cursor. It's the X key for most of you. It is the primary thing that you'll be using. You should be tapping your X key, whenever you can, just to bring you back to the basic cursor. It's just got selection functions here. That's holding down the mouse button. You can click on things. There's also 3 checkboxes up here. If you remember, this little bar at the top gives us all of our options for selection, and for every other tool you'll often see little icons up here that can do different variations on the general tool handling. Some people often find that this one here, if they've hit this one, which is the interactive scaling, they won't get any handlebars on their tools, and I'll just quickly draw a rectangle to show you. If I go back to here, you can see that I don't actually get any tool handlebars here, and some people go, why can't I make this bigger or smaller, James? I can only seem to drag it around. It's because you've got this here dechecked or swapped onto the disable of interactive handles, and you can see now I'll get them back. Often you might be on a laptop and accidentally click that, and people get confused for quite a long time and say, why can't I grab the handles anymore? The second one, there's no real difference between the two of these. The unrestricted interactive scaling mode is just a little bit different for some of your polygons and stuff like that, but mainly just leave it on this one here. Also, if you've got multiple objects, sometimes you might need to do different selection criteria with this. So you've obviously got the square or rectangular selection. You can do oval selection if it's more appropriate for you, and also polygon selection. Sorry, that's actually freehand and polygon selection. So you can see here I can draw a polygon around objects, double click to end, or the freehand if I just want to kind of lasso around things. An important thing to remember as well when using these is that you can use the, in my case it's the Shift and Alt keys, but also the Command and Shift keys for you guys to choose whether you're selecting whole objects or deselecting objects from a group. So you can see here, if I select over these 3 objects and then hold down Shift and select over the middle object, it removes that from the group, or if I'm holding down Shift still, which I am, it can also add to the current group selected. Just handy things to know about the selection tool. Navigating around your space. Now you can use the pan tool if you like. You click on it here, click, drag, move around the space quite nicely. An easier option is, when you've got your cursor selected, is just to hold down the spacebar key, and that'll bring up your hand for you. Click, drag, let go of spacebar, you're back to your cursor. And you can do that with any tool. If I've got the rectangle selected here, hold down spacebar and I get my hand, there it is there. Click, drag, navigate around, back to whatever tool I was using before. X takes me back to the cursor. 3D fly around tool, we've talked about this a little bit. In 2012 everything is drawn on the playing space, which we'll get to quite a bit further along the track, but for now the 3D flyover tool does allow you to view things in 3D, as you can see here. And at any point in time, if you need to go back to that 2D playing space, hit the 0 key on your numpad, or you can hold down Command, the Apple key, and 5 will take you back to plan view. Or if you need a visual reference, you can drop this list down here and click on plan view. We'll discuss 3D a little bit later on in the lesson. Zooming in and out, you can use the zoom tool. It's quite inefficient, I find. You have to click and select an area to zoom into, and then hold down the it's the Command key for you guys, or the Alt key for me, and then do another selection box to zoom out. I find it very inefficient. The secondary mode up here that you see is a little bit better. Interactive scaling allows you to zoom in and zoom out, so clicking once, zoom in by moving it upwards, or zoom out by moving it downwards. Still slightly inefficient. I find that using the scroll wheel, and I'll just leave it on cursor so you can see, using scroll wheel is actually a better method, but sometimes it's a little bit fiddly depending on your mouse settings. Running through these ones here, there's something that we haven't really used very much, but we will talk about, especially in lesson 4 and 5 of this set of learning. We've got the text tool. Obviously click, type away in here, press escape to confirm, You've got a few different options up here, but we'll run through these a little bit more, and obviously there's a lot of data going on here in the object info panel. I'm just going to delete that for now. The callout tool is something that we will discuss in lesson 4 and 5. It's quite detailed. Loci tool as well. It's a more advanced tool. There is also the 3D loci, and we will discuss the differences between those. Jumping over a few here, simple insertion, the line tool, quite obvious, and it is something that we will get using a lot more. It's just a point and click tool, and it follows a lot of the principles that all the other tools follow. Once again, a few other options up there, but they're irrelevant for now. It's the dash tool and the double line tool, all following the same principles. So now we obviously come to one of the biggest tools, and probably my favourite tool in Vectorworks, which is ironic. Most people say, gosh, you're boring whenever you try and start this class talking about rectangles, and as you probably know from our first series of classes, the rectangle tool was my favourite tool, turned out to be the tool that we probably spent the longest time talking about. And once again, in this video here, we'll spend probably a good 5 to 10 minutes talking about the rectangle tool. Up here you can see there's multiple modes of drawing. We'll just run through quickly what those different modes are, and I'm actually just going to get rid of these so we've got a blank playing space to start with. So, selecting the rectangle tool here, just starting with the different drawing modes, that's all we're going to focus on right now. We have got the corner to corner, which, as you can see, click in one corner, click in a second corner, can be drawn back to front. No matter where you're drawing it from, you'll end up with a rectangle. Now just quickly on this, if you hold down the shift key, it will constrain you to symmetrical if you need to make a square. The other function keys don't seem to do a great deal to this. It's mainly just the symmetrical lines, and you can see here as well we've got some other constraints. There's a 30-degree constraint there, obviously symmetrical is 45, and there's also a 30-degree inverted. Now you'll only be able to get those if you have these attribute panels here active. In this case it's the snap to angle command as well as some of the intersection commands. We will talk in great detail about this because as we move into the realm of 3D we need to know a lot more about these and what their smart points are for. Just talking back on the rectangles, there's another option here, and obviously you can float over these. The center and corner, it's pretty self-explanatory. One click makes the center point, one click makes the corner. Here you go, see? Holding down shift once again makes it symmetrical from the center no matter where the corner is that we're going for. The third option is the center bottom and top. Now you can see here, that's the resultant there. Holding down the Alt key, or for you guys on a Mac it will be the Command key, will do the inverted side. So you can see here that we're moving to the top, and in this case the bottom. Holding down the inverse is the side, and the side from the center. An interesting one, you probably won't use it as much as some of the other features, but still important. The rotate rectangle mode is often underappreciated, and it's actually where most of my rectangle time is spent, when I'm having a little bit of rectangle time with Vectorworks. This one here is what most people learn on, but this one's actually the most useful in my opinion. And I'm just going to grab all of these with Control A for me, or Command Apple key A for you guys, which is select all. I'm going to get rid of them just so we have enough time to play with the rotated rectangle. The rotated rectangle, more advanced than these three here, it actually requires 3 mouse clicks to operate. The first click sets a corner, the second click sets the bottom value, and the third click is the upwards value. Now you can do this in multiple ways. You can see here I'm going to draw it with a first click in the corner, second as a vertical click, and then extruding outwards from here as well. Now the advantage obviously of the rotated rectangle is once you've defined this first point here with your first click, that second baseline can be anywhere. In here we might want to put it on a 45 degree, might want to place it here on a 30 degree, and then the second click moves outwards from our bottom baseline. Obviously this is great if you want to join between objects, if you want to match up between unknown lines and create objects from there. Also locking to some of these other points can create great shapes for you. Now rectangles are also great for us. Not only are they slightly upwards of the line tool in terms of reference markers, mainly because they have an area, but they're also a great teaching tool for some of this stuff here in the object info panel. Now, as you notice, when I start drawing these, we start to get these little control panels, and although I can't click on them here, they're indicated in blue just below my mouse cursor at the moment. These are indicating a difference, in this case a plus or minus sign, showing the difference in X and the difference in Y from our starting position. You can notice here as I move away from this endpoint here, which has the reference of 0, 0, and move across the page, we indicate an upwards value in X, and as I go this way, a negative value in X, and an upwards value in Y, and a negative value in Y. Just the same as it is the Cartesian plane from your maths classes around year 8 or 9. So these things here are useful because if we start drawing a rectangle and we all of a sudden want it to be a specific size, we can press our Tab key and jump into these panels here. I might, for this example, want to lock my X value as 200, so I'll simply type 200 in there, press Enter once, and you can see it's restrained me now to the 200 line on the X value from where my starting point was. No matter where I go, I'm constrained to this red line here of 200. And then once again, if I go up here, you can see an increase in Y. My baseline has been set as 0x, but once again I can press Tab twice, and all of a sudden into this second field here where I might want to make one that's 250. Enter again, and now because of those coordinates that have been locked in here, I'm actually constrained to only being able to click, no matter where I am, to restrain there. The moment I've done this also, it's been reflected over here in my object information panel. My rectangle now has a width of 200 and a height of 250. I can change these values, but before I do, we'll just discuss this small little reference panel here. This indicates which corner of my current object, in some polygons as well, it will reference a bounding box I am actually looking at this object from. Now if you imagine this is a pin stuck in the page, in this indicator here we've got the top left hand corner selected, and it's almost as though a pin has been thrown through this top left hand box. If you have a look, when I alter these values here, for height for example, if I make this 100, this point here has remained fixed at all times, and the baseline here has been brought up by 150 points. Once again, if I increase the width here to 400, this point here has remained the same, and all the points have grown out from there. If I was to select the center position, the center would remain the same, and it would be evenly distributed outwards from there. This is very handy. Sometimes when you are increasing or decreasing values, they mightn't go the way you want, so you often want to make sure that you have thoroughly looked at this little panel here before making that decision. And remember, you can always go back with the Apple Z or Control Z if you're on the Windows computer, which is undo. I'm going to undo a few values here and bring us back to this stage right here. The last little piece here of information is rotation value, which of course you can just type in any arbitrary number and rotate an object to that position. Obviously, in this case 180 degrees will bring us back to exactly what we have here. Location coordinates, which are located here, we will discuss a little bit further on down the track when we talk about moving objects, as I'm sure some of you are already aware. The last little piece that we're going to talk about while we have rectangles in our position is the double click rule. It's all very well to draw rectangles, and we can do that in multiple fashions in any way that we would like to, but sometimes it's more efficient to type the numbers in, especially if you're of a mathematical mind rather than an artistic mind. If you double click on almost any one of these shape tools, you will be presented with this dialog box here, which is the Create Object dialog box. Inside here it will have general information about each of the different shapes you can create, and they vary in different objects modifiers, so I suggest that you have a good read through if you have a chance to. In here we can predefine a width and height for our objects, and sometimes it will include radius and some other modifiers such as points and that kind of thing. In here I'm just going to create a very general box that is 300 in width and 500 in height. These two sections here now coincide with each other. This is the insertion point for the object, as you can see here. I might like to choose to insert it from the top left hand corner, maybe the bottom left hand corner. And here another option. I'm going to leave it at position at next click for now, and then I'm going to do a second one without that checked. So bottom left hand corner, position at next click. So I'll click here. You can see it has put the bottom left hand corner of this object where my cursor was, and given it out from there at our specified width and a height. I'm just going to delete that object and all the other objects on my page. Now just having a look at the ruler, 0 is here and here, so this point right about here is 0, 0. What I'm going to do now is double click once again. I'm going to create the same object, but this time I want the bottom left corner to be at 0, 0. Type in 0 and 0 in here, and decheck the position next click box, which means it will actually position at these coordinates located here. Now obviously it doesn't have to be 0, 0, it might be an arbitrary number that you've calculated as the corner of another box, or something like that. Click OK, and this bottom corner here you can see is lined up at 0 and 0. Over here, also 0 and 0.
Cities are great places for rectangles. They are all over. You just have to know what you're looking for. A rectangle is a shape with 4 sides and 4 corners, remember? So let's start looking. Nope, no rectangles there. Or here. Wait a minute. Look at this. See that window? That window is a rectangle. A shape with 4 sides and 4 corners. And this sill under the window is also a rectangle. And these bricks? Right, you guessed it, all rectangles. I tell you, the city is just full of rectangles.
Your first Vectorworks challenge thus far is to recreate this image using only the rectangle tool and the copy and paste functions found under your edit menu. You should allow yourself around 3 to 5 minutes to complete this task. If you have any questions, feel free to find me and ask them. Good luck! So I've just gotten rid of an outbox, and we're just going to move on through a couple more other objects here, some of the more shapes that we're going to explore in a little more detail. A rounded rectangle is very similar to the rectangle tool itself. It only has 2 basic modifier options here, the corner to corner and the baseline and height option once again. But it also has this pencil and spanner, and this is the first time that we've encountered this so far in this set of lessons. Pencil and spanner basically means there's more options to be displayed, but they can't actually be displayed in this finite amount of space here. If you click on this here, you can see that there's different corner styles you can have. Having both of these dechecked means that you can enter custom corner diameters, and you can also have symmetrical corners and proportional corners. In this example here, I might like to have none of these. I could say that our corner diameters are 130, for example. You can see also if I click OK, draw a corner to corner, these here will now have a radius of half of those values, because of course diameter is twice of a circle. But they should have a 50 here and a 15 here. Obviously these values can be changed here if you desire that. There you go, you can see that's got a bit more of a curve. You can also set that to have a proportional corner or a symmetrical corner, which means both the values will be the same, which is obviously the most appealing. Quite simple once you've played with the rectangle tool enough, and you can also use one of these to adjust for a different effect. The circle tool, probably my second favourite. Compared to the rectangle tool, that is, nothing can beat the rectangle, but the circle comes a close second. It actually has 6 different modifiers here that we can play with, and we're going to hit them straight off the bat. The first one, centre to the exterior. Obviously counting in radius here for the length, and that's quite easy to distinguish there. I might just draw these side by side so we get an example of each. So that's centre to the outward side, known as the radius draw. This is the diameter draw, which is from one side to the other diameter. The 3-point draw. It's especially handy if you've got some constraints in place. I might throw a few in just quickly. If you know that you need a circle which will fit inside of these 3 points here, you can in fact choose the circle tool, using the 3 points, make a circle that will fit inside, touching all 3 of these points here. You can also do it from 3 linear objects. This is a little more difficult to do, and I'll see if I can make it happen now for us. There we go. So that's obviously fitting within 3 linear points. Obviously you won't have much use for it, but if you are of a mathematical mind, it is very, very cool to play with this one here. Just showing different versions of what you can create from that. This one is the reverse of basically of the circle by radius mode. This is the circle by outer to inner. So you can see from the outer edge to the inner edge by radius. And the last mode here, which is circle by tangent. And for those of you who don't know what a tangent is when a line, and in this case a circle, has a gradient of 0. So in this case here, the bottom baseline, which is here, is 0 with the base of the circle. It's very, very similar to this mode here, which is the point and center. It does have a few additional functions when you get further down the track, but not really. Circles, once again, if you double click, do have a bit of the double click rule to them. There can be a certain position on the page, which obviously has that center at next click. It just doesn't have the little box of corners that we normally play with. And of course it does have a radius or diameter. Both of these are proportional. As you can see here, a radius of 100 will equal a diameter of 200. I accidentally pressed enter then. And of course you can choose to do a pie sweep with these, so if you do not actually wish to have a full circle, you can narrow that down. I'm just going to choose an arbitrary angle here, and you'll see that you'll actually only get a circle which has a portion cut out of it. The Pac-Man circle, as some of us might think of it as. So that's 6 circles right there. All of them do have various values that they can be edited in here. Obviously if you change the sweep modifier, you'll get those additional angles and stuff that you see here. Just note here that once this object has been made into this, it is no longer a closed object. We'll discuss closed and open objects later on, but briefly you can see this solid line here and a broken line here. They just have different modifiers when they're extruded. I'm going to select all of these and delete them, and we'll start with something afresh. So moving on from the circle tool, we move to the oval tool, its slightly deformed brother. And much like the rounded rectangle tool, it only has 2 modifiers on here. It has the diagonal corner to corner mode, and it also has the baseline and upwards draw you can see happening here. Now it's a good time to talk about bounding boxes, and bounding boxes are a slightly mathematical term, but they're a good thing to just have in the back of your mind. This rectangle here, this oval here, when you have a look over here, you can see it's actually represented by a square shape, and what this square shape here is representing is actually the bounding box. Now, a bounding box, just to show you quickly, is actually when a circular, in this case, object, but also a polyline or polygon, is contained within a box. It's actually the most extreme points you can see here. That's the most extreme top, the most extreme right, bottom, and side. Now, that might seem irrelevant in this case, because obviously if I click rotation here and type in 45 degrees, we're rotating around this center point. But if I take it back a step here, and I rotate from this bottom left-hand corner, it goes, where is the bottom left-hand corner of this shape? And in this case it is this bottom point here of the bounding box. So sometimes when you rotate a shape, it might rotate awkwardly because it's actually rotating around somewhere that's outside the bounding box. Just something to keep in mind there. And also when you do a rotation like this, the bounding box of the object's actually changed in Vectorworks' mind. It won't change on some of these basic objects because it knows that it's got a rotation value of 45 degrees. But just when you're thinking about bounding boxes here, and it's a bit hard to represent, but the bounding box approximately would now be more like such. You can see here, just from a mathematic point of view, that's a new kind of bounding box shape there. If you go into scripting later on, you will become great friends with the bounding box. If you're not going into scripting, then you'll completely forget about what I just said. The arc tool here, you can see it's got quite a lot of modes here. I'm only really going to talk about the first 2 and maybe the 4th one as well, because the other was completely irrelevant to your purposes. This one here, it's very, very simple to use. The first point here, or first click, defines the center point, and this is where the radius is going to start from. The second click will define the upper limit, as I call it, of the radius. It also defines the radius length there, defined by L. Once you click here, and then the sweep is the third value, and you can see here this is what's happening from the center point to the outer limit, and now the sweep of the circle. And once again, if I do that here to here, I can create our Pac-Man again. All of those values, just quickly, you can put in a modifier here and just press tab, type in 100, and all of a sudden I've set a radial length. And the same with the sweep, or any of these values that you see here in blue, you can set a specific number here, and all that's represented here by all of these different modifiers. Arc by 3-point mode, very similar, although there's no radial setting in the center. It's 1 click, 2 click, and it has to pass through all three of these points. So you can see it's passing through the first here, the second up here, and the third wherever I decide to place it. It must be constrained and run through all of the points as I define here. Obviously, if you only have 2 points that you define and the third one is back at the start, the only solution is a circle. The third one here, by tangent, it's only really used if you're completely nerdy and off this planet and you know lots about tangents, which is where the gradient equals 1 or 0 perhaps. Arc by 2 points in center mode, defining 2 points and then using it like a bow or a crossbow to define the radial point here. If the central radial point is equal with the 2, you can see we created a semicircle, and then moving backwards from there obviously flattens out the circle because the radial point must be lower. It is as if you were drawing, and going back to our circle tool here, part of a larger circle. I'll just try and demonstrate. If we were passing through 3 points here, you can see there is the larger version of the circle with the radius obviously here at the center. Last part of the arc here, these last 3 you'll never use. If you wish to pursue them further, I suggest that you do the further reading under the help menu for arcs. I'm going to select everything here and delete it for now. The freehand tool is something that I strongly advise that you never use with a mouse. I only ever suggest that you use the freehand tool if you are using a tablet. That would be the only time that I could see the freehand tool of being any use compared to a polyline tool, for example, or any of your other basic shapes with cutting. If you do wish to use it, feel free to. I'm not going to hold anything against you, and obviously it's your choice, but I cannot see any purpose for it apart from using a drawing tablet to sketch a shape out. The next two here, the Polyline tool and the Polygon tool, and people often ask what is the difference between a polyline and a polygon. And simply a polyline is an open line, and I'm just going to start drawing here with the straight line, and I'll explain them in a second. The Polyline tool is simply this: it is a line until it is closed and then it becomes a polygon. And why do we say this? Because it's a polyline, and then when the gap is gone, it's a polygon. Because the gap is gone. People love it. That's great. You can also see it's represented here. This won't actually change from a polyline to a polygon until it's a sealed shape, and that's when it's simply extruded. That's when it becomes a sealed shape. But you can also see here there's a small checkbox that says closed. Now you can see here if I press the closed checkbox, obviously just fills in that shape for us. It also increases the perimeter value here, which you'll notice this has a perimeter of, in this case, 951. And once it's closed, it has an additional perimeter value, indicating that this is actually an open shape, and this white space here doesn't really exist as such. Moving back here to the Polyline tool, there's some different drawing modes here. These ones here are probably the 3 most common ones that you'll ever use. The others are not so much, but we'll have a go at trying to explain them anyway. Straight line mode, as you just saw, it's very much a click to click, 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 click. All of these obviously have the blue modifiers once again for setting length and angle from their previous counterpart. And obviously if you want to make it a whole shape, just make sure you're joining back here at the end point. Now, Bezier curves. There's something that if you've used Illustrator or Photoshop you'll kind of have a vague interest in, but really they're rather hard to explain. And I actually have a very difficult time explaining them because I don't find very much of a purpose for them. As you can see here as I'm drawing, they kind of match that, but they're meant to be more appealing to the eye, and I'm sure some mathematic professors could explain it better than I can. I've in fact got the Wikipedia page open right here in front of me, demonstrating Bezier curves and how they work with these lovely animations, and I honestly like this formula here. It doesn't really appeal to me at all. That looks pretty, sure, I'm sure it's the best curve that could possibly fit between those points, but to me that's not really helping right now. This form here is actually more appealing to me, where each of the points of the line have to pass through each other. So here you can see it must pass through this point and this point and this point, if I had the tool selected, it would be doing that naturally. Let's try that again. Through this point and this point and this point, you can see that it must pass through each of those, no matter what shape that tries to create for us. It must always fit through these points, especially great if you're creating a garden path or something like that. By tangent mode, it's not really relevant. I can try and demonstrate it to you, but it's just, it must pass through a tangential point of this equaling 0, I guess, here. If one of you has better math skills than me, then go ahead and explain that to me later on. Getting rid of those. Now this one here, I have actually used it quite a lot. It's the point arc mode, and if any of you have some sort of lighting design background, you'll find it great for documenting your lighting designs. Let's just pretend for a second that some of these are lighting devices, and you've got to the point where you're up to labeling them and they've all been ganged together. You can use this to create some rather nice identifying lines between each of these, just indicating that although they are separate, they've actually all got the same ganked value here. If you were, for example, putting them all on the same channel, it might be nice to use that in your documentation. I'm sure there's other practical uses for it, as I was trying to demonstrate before this video, just creating some nice shapes from them and that kind of thing, which most of these do anyway, but you know, you might like to use that in a design sometime. So picking right up, I'm just going to get rid of these. Now I'm just quickly going to run through the next probably 4, maybe 5 items until we get to the exciting, fun stuff at the end. The Polygon tool, it's just must be closed vertices. That's all that can happen here. It's just weird why they still have this tool in the program itself. It does have a full fill from the boundary button, and this can be quite useful. Just giving you a quick example here, if you had a whole heap of intersecting lines, like some sort of artwork, you can use this tool here to fill from the lines. You can see it creates a shape from the inner boundary set of those lines. Just whatever they are intersecting, it does make something there, but really you won't find any other use for it apart from that. It's mainly just used for creating closed objects, which in this version of Vectorworks particularly, the Polyline tool just does a far better job of doing. The regular Polygon tool, it's quite simple. It only has 3 drawing modes here, and they've actually made it a lot nicer in Vectorworks 2012. It used to have a big clunky box that used to do various things, but now it's just a simple number input. Here we've got 6, which is obviously making a hexagon. So I'm simply going to draw in this mode from the center outwards, there we go. You can also use the control key in my circumstance to change whether you are drawing to a side or whether you are drawing to a point. For you guys on a Mac, that will be your also your command key. You can just see the variation here, and that's between the 2 modes as indicated up here. This also has, once again, the blue box for modification. Click again. And there's also a side mode here if you'd like to define what one of the individual baseline sides are, or if you rotate it around, obviously a vertical side. And I'm just going to show you here. If I increase this to say a decagon, once again 10 sides, there you go. And if you want to go to 11 and create a 50-cent piece, that's your choice.
Did I wake you? I guess that means you haven't been murdered. Well, that's good.
Your second challenge for this session is to recreate this pattern. You may use any of the shapes that you have found thus far, as well as the copy and paste functions from the edit menu. If you need any help, just remember to come find me. You've probably got about 5 to 10 minutes to finish this task. Good luck. The swirl, it's simply if you're bored, that's all it is. Spiral, there's some options here for insertion. Don't play with it, it'll just ruin your computer one day, I guarantee it. The eyedropper tool, we might come back to this when we do classes, and the custom selection tool as well. We will come back to that when we do selection criteria. The visibility tool goes along with the classes. We'll skip over this. Attribute mapping, also the reshape tool we'll get to with polygons. So this is where the fun really begins, and I know that we had a big long discussion about this tool, the rotate tool, the mirror tool, and this one here, the move by points tool, or as I like to call it, the duplicate tool. all the others in between are irrelevant for the remainder of this learning period at the very least. So the free rotation tool, obviously when we draw basic objects here, I'm going to represent with this rectangle here, we do have the rotation modifier which will be altered by whatever our box is here, obviously on the center point with a rotation, throwing in a value here such as 45, rotates it on that 45 degree angle there. I'm just going to bring that back to 0 for now. But sometimes that doesn't quite work for us. For example, if we've got an odd shape here, such as this rectangle here, this point here on the very corner of this rectangle isn't actually defined by this corner point here in the center, and we need to rotate this in another way. That's where this rotation tool actually comes in handy. Noticing the two different modifiers up here, we do have the single rotate mode, and I'm just going to click no on this, and the rotate and copy mode. Just with a single rotation here, the first click defines the locked point. This is once again just putting a pin right through that center of the page. The second is the rotation axes, and here this is just like the baseline. We're just simply drawing a reference line, and I'm drawing it across the horizontal base here. And then the third is the rotation. You can see already it's rotating along this baseline here with that fixed point to wherever I drag this to. I'm sure you're all very much aware of how this works now. Just once again drawing that out. It can be anywhere here, this reference line, and then just rotating around that fixed point. Obviously duplicate, it's once again the same, just from this point, second point, and you can see once I click it actually copies that object again. The mirror tool, it is a little bit complex. I'm just going to create an arbitrary polyline here, just something a bit unique so that we can actually see what's going on. Here we go, big. That looks great there. Using the mirror tool, it has two functions, just the simple mirror mode. And what I'm going to do here, it's as if you're putting a mirror in a room. If this is an object in a room and you put a mirror here, what will it look like? If it's on the other side, it will naturally look like that. Just that planar through there. And you can do this here if I wanted to go midway through the object and flip it over on itself, or flip it over on itself this way. And it's even more emphasized with the mirror and duplicate mode. If I draw a mirror axis here, it mirrors itself along that center line, and if I draw one across this plane here, it's mirrored that way obviously, and that will work on any angle. Just remembering though, with objects here, they are obviously dependent on where the mirror is placed. So if I place a mirror axis on here, you can see that they've been butted up against each other, but the space is literal. So here with about 100 mil gap, it's got the same amount of gap on the other side of the mirror. Now this does take us to our last object, or last option here, which is the move by points, or the duplicate mode as I like to call it. I'm just going to grab all of these and get rid of them, and we'll just start with one circle here, draw in the basic mode. Now this circle here, he's quite nice, but I'd love to give him some friends. Now obviously I could copy and paste him in several times, and we'll talk a bit about copying and pasting. In fact, we can do that now. Using, for me it's Control-C, or for you guys the Apple and C key. It's just like Microsoft Word, copy, paste, cut, all of those things still apply. So for example, I can, cut this object, that gets rid of it. That was my Control-C, or Apple, sorry, that was Control-X, or Apple X for you guys, cuts that away. Apple V or Control V will paste him back in place, just happens to be in the same location, but it will actually be wherever I click. I'm just pasting these in. There we go, wherever I'm clicking last, it will get pasted into. That's all well and good, but I've actually now forgotten which of these was my original circle. But I would actually like another circle directly on top of the previous circle. I might need to do some work. You can, from the edit menu, go paste in place, which is a fantastic option to have. Or, as you can see here, for me it's Control-Alt-V. For you guys, it'll be Control and, Apple and Command-V, I believe. You may just have to check your menus for that, and I'll confirm that on day, and you can see that's where my original circle was. And if I keep pressing that, you can see I'm copying more and more on the same location there. There they all are there. So that's a little bit about copying and pasting, but I'm just going to draw this circle here. I'm going to paste him back in place again. There's our original circle back as himself. Your third challenge for this lesson is to recreate this image or pattern. It's probably best if you attempt to use the rounded rectangle tool and the group command using Apple G and Apple U for group and ungroup respectively. Probably allow yourself 10 to 15 minutes to complete this task, and make sure that you use the rotate and the mirror function at least once. Good luck! Now here I might actually need to do a bit of work here, and they've cleaned up this dialog once again with 2012 compared to 2010 and 11 and all of the previous versions. There is still a pencil here if you would like to get this quick dialog here in here again, and the retain option, which is very important to us later on down the track. There's three options here. This is move, and you just look at the little arrow here. This will indicate what you're doing. Move mode by a little distance, which is the distance gap between the objects. Move by an overall distance, which is here called distribute mode. And move by a specified or reference point mode, which you won't use as much. And I think that's reorientation mode, which is something that's just a little bit new to this 2012 version. So here I'm just going to select our circle. I'm going to select the move by points, and just give you an example here. I'm going to need 3 circles. So the interval spacing here, just to give you an overview of both, and I might actually, just before we do this, duplicate this little guy here so that we can see an example of both of these. And I might just also set some reference markers for myself. I'm going to set this as first as my gaps width, and this is my overall width over here. Those are completely irrelevant. So the first test I'm going to do here is the move mode. Clicking here on the center line, and this is my distribution value. You can see it's made 3 copies of that and deleted the original with the exact spacing of that in between there. Just to make sure, I'm going to put a line in between here and here, and I'm going to mirror that, and you can see that each time it's lined up on the center points exactly through there. Now I could achieve a slightly different result using this circle here selected and the overall distribute mode for my 3 circles. Between this point here and this gap here, you can see it's distributed the circles. Now it's really hard to see what's going on here without the retain option. I'm going to undo that here. I'm going to click retain. So that means it's going to be 3 duplicates plus the one here. That's what you need to remember. Duplicates is a plus the original, and if you don't have retain, the original doesn't exist anymore. So just here again with this distribute mode, you can see from here to here means I want to place 3 more, which is approximately here, here, and here. And you can actually see if I line these up, they should end up the same as their original counterparts up here. Obviously you can do this multiple times, which creates great pattern effects if you need to do them, and you can use this to create really easy grids as well. So just getting rid of these. Some practical examples of these is if I start off with this, and we're just going to make a small miniature rostra here, which is going to be 200 by 100, for example. Oop, that's obviously I'm in the wrong drawing mode for that. So there's 200, and I'm going to take this down and make this negative 100. So this is a small piece of rostra that I've got here, and using this I'm going to make a really quick seating bank. So I'm just going to zoom out a fraction. It's going to be 4 across, 3 deep. There we go, straight out. Move by points. It's going to be 3 duplicates I need to retain, and I'm also going to leave selected. This is the distance, so the distance between each one is the length of each one. So in this case I'm going to go from this corner to this corner. That defines our length, and you can see it's gone. Okay, that's your length. So copy one that's that far apart. There it is. Copy one that's that far apart. There it is. Copy one that's that far apart. There it is. Now, conveniently, because I've had it leave selected and all 3 of these, I can now just type in here I need 2 more rows. So throw a 2 in here, and the distance is once again from here to here. There we go. Instantly I've got a grid of 12, and that's ready to make a seating bank right there. Your fourth challenge is to recreate this pattern. You may use the rectangle tool, the polygon tool or polyline tool, and also the duplicate or move by points function as discussed previously. See if you can do it using only those 3 tools. Come find me if you need any assistance, This task should take you 10 minutes. Good luck. Great, so we've pretty much covered everything in the basic toolset. I'm just going to try and pop that back into here. And I know it'll refuse because it gets really angry at me for no particular reason at all. I think it's something to do with the recording. But that's okay. Attributes can stay out here for now. I'm just going to get rid of all of this. We're going to move right along to constraints, and then we're going to talk about the design layers and where you should start heading from here in terms of building and starting a basic work. So here we are, we've got the attributes panel, and we've also got the constraints panel. The attributes panel, it's really straightforward. I'm just going to do it once again with one of my favourite things, the rectangle. Really, really easy. There's some more complex things later on down the line that we'll discuss. But right, for now, to get your head around it, first one is whether it's solid, what type of thing's going on the inside and then the outside. So you can have a pattern of none, obviously translucent. Solid, pattern, hatch, tile, gradient, image, and then the class style. Class style we'll get to later, but all of the others should be self-explanatory. You choose a pattern, there's the pattern, choose what type of pattern, what colours are in the pattern. Same thing goes for hatch, same thing goes for tiling. Gradients is same thing except with colours, so you know, left to right gradients, all the stuff that you might see in Photoshop or Illustrator. Images, choose an image from file, map it to the shape. These attributes here, especially if you're working with a basic copy, that's pretty much all you'll have in terms of colour for 2D objects and also for 3D objects. It's only really if you have the Renderworks package that you can diverge from what you see here and make it more suited towards some sort of rendering purpose. So if you are just considering, obviously during your time here at VCA, you have the ability to use this and also the Renderworks package, but when you enter the industry you might not have the $3-4 grand that it costs to get the full package. You might only have $800 to $1,000, which is probably what it'll cost you to get the standard Vectorworks license for yourself. As I said, here's also the pen type, which you can have as a pattern or a dash style if you like, and you can obviously choose a colour from here as well. The dash type itself is actually indicated down here. You can click on that and choose a different dash style if you would like, and you can see it's being affected here on the page. There's also some custom styles you can add in here through the Edit Dash Styles menu, and feel free to have a play with that if you need to move away from some of these standard ones, but I don't see a need to. Also, opacity of the shape, is it see-through? Obviously 100% is completely there. 0% would mean it's completely translucent or invisible, and 50%-ish means it's semi-see-through, as you can see here. And I'll just put another object behind there just to show you that it is somewhat translucent, a bit hard with white on white, but we might choose red for example, and there you go. It is some sort of pinky colour through there. There you go. Just a warning about opacity, it will chew through your processing time and your computing power if you do play with opacity quite a lot, especially things like water opacity, glass opacity, and particularly light opacity. If you are rendering something that has a light source in it shining through something opaque, some of the later rendering modes will chew through your processing power attempting to use opacity, so it is something to think about. And when we talk about classes later on, just remember that if you do set it to a class opacity, that you can in fact change the class according to your needs and then bring it back. The last little checkbox here is align end marker, and just to demonstrate if you are drawing arrows, obviously you can draw an arrow yourself the old school way, like such. But if you want to go for something a little bit more flash than that, you can put an arrowhead on there, and you can see there's my arrowhead there. It is dependent on the line thickness, indicated here, and it's also dependent on what style of class you choose here. Obviously that changes the arrowhead itself, and that's obviously the starting arrow. They can be linked and toggled accordingly. So we are now going to talk about constraints after putting attributes away. We've got the constraints panel here, and I'm actually starting with all of my constraints off at this point in time. Just going to go through them one by one. Zooming in slightly, you can see the grid reference here already, and this can be set by double clicking on the grid marker here, also under the document settings later on if you need it. You can see here it's got some options here, turning on the snap grid, the reference grid, just what is your snap, they're just showing with the grid. It's quite a weird number at the moment, I'm not sure why it's currently set to that. Might have been an imperial to metric change, but I'm going to leave it there for now. So with just snap grid on, you can see if I start drawing this line from any point here, it does make it quite hard for me to draw this freehand. You can see it jumping all over the place, and zooming in you can see just the snap tolerance there between this here. It is quite hard. You will find that you probably never really have the snap to grid turned on, mainly because it just makes life difficult. Obviously it's a great tool for being very accurate, but using the other constraints effectively will actually eliminate your need for the snap to grid tool to be used. So just turning that off, deleting these, I'm going to draw quickly a rectangle like such. There we go, beautiful. So the next snap to objects, it effectively enables the use of each of these, and you can see the moment I come close to an object I get these options here indicated by the little black lines. I get top left, I get the center point, I get all of the corners, and I get all of the centers as well. And it also gives us the ability to slide along an object. You can see here I'm sliding along an edge point. That's indicated here, and it'll happen with any shape as well. If I draw a circle, you can see I'm snapping to not only the top center, the center right, bottom, the center point, but also to the edging, and that'll happen with any object that you bring out onto the page. Obviously this is great for being pinpoint accurate, as opposed to having this turned off and kind of guessing where an edge might be. If you have it turned on, obviously you can snap straight to that corner. You can see it just locks right in there. Obviously another example here from center to center, and this just makes it, obviously your drawings will get sloppy if you start doing things like this, whereas this, it's accurate. No matter how far I zoom in, it's always going to be locked directly on that point, which is great. Zooming all the way out here, there we go. So deleting these, we'll go to our third constraint here, which is snap to angle. Now I'm just going to click in here, and you can see obviously the moment that I start drawing my rotated rectangle, I'm automatically on the horizontal here, but you can also see I'll snap to the 30, which is somewhere here, the 45, the inverted 30 up here, and then the vertical, and this works all the way around here, all the way around our circle. So choosing obviously one of these, taking it out from there. Now there's a couple other options. If you double click here, you can also predefine another angle. So say for a particular thing you need a 10-degree angle from the center line, you can just put in a colon here, type in 10, and click OK. And you can see now, the moment that I start drawing, I've got the horizontal, but I also should get 10 degrees in here, which can be quite handy. Obviously you can press tab, and another thing for the tab, if you keep going, you'll get these other modifiers here, and I can type in 10 or maybe even 15 degrees, and I'll get locked on one of these. So sometimes it's handy to press tab a few more times in these smaller dialog boxes and just find out what else might be appropriate there. Obviously the more you get to use Vectorworks, the more you'll find out about these things. I'm just going to make sure I remove that, just in case at some point in the future it gets me trapped. The 30 and the 45 are kind of standard, and I think you'll agree that they come in handy sometimes for creating most of your geometric patterns. Turning that off, we've got snap to intersection next, and if I just draw two arbitrary boxes here that have some sort of overlapping here and here, obviously, when I'm drawing a third with the snap to intersection turned on, you can see, although I'm not snapping to any of the corners because obviously I don't have snap to object, it will snap to where these objects intersect there and also there, you can see. And this is great, it should work with any object as well. So once again, if I draw a circle that touches a couple of points there, the moment that I come close you can see it's snapped to intersect there, for example. Now the biggest feature which comes to 2011, it might also be 2010, I'll have to confirm that, but definitely 2012, and it almost replaces Smart Points almost replaces some of these other options, especially the Smart Edge and also the Tangent. but most of the time you'll just have smart points turned on, and my default screen looks like this with the objects, the angle, the intersection, and the smart points, sometimes smart edge if you're feeling it. The best thing though about the smart points is what comes up here. So I've drawn a few arbitrary shapes here, and the advantage of having this, and I might have to turn on the corners just here to get this happening a little bit more as well. Smart points, although you can grab each of these corners here and have a look and line up to them, when you linger on a point a little bit longer than normal, it'll actually turn red, and you get 3 of these red little checkboxes that you can have. And you can see the moment that I move away from this point, I actually get an extension line happening in both the horizontal and the vertical. The great thing about this is you can actually start accumulating points. So I've got 2 here. You can see now it's given me the midpoint between here, and I'm actually breaking this down because I'm lingering on them, but I can keep going midpoint, 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 but just taking it back here to the bottom center, the bottom left, and you can see that I can now happen to be on this edge line here, for example, between the 2, and I can start drawing from there. And then I might want the extension line from the top center here and where this corner meets in mid-air. Now obviously I'd have to calculate this normally, but I can actually just lock these 2 in, and I know that point right there is the top center and the top left hand corner of that meeting together. Having smart points is really handy for doing quick but yet accurate drawings, you know, lining things up to top areas, or where that's going to meet with the horizontal somewhere there. So moving on from smart points, we move on to snap to distance, and snap to distance is handy. You kind of forget that it's there though. I never really use it in the way that it should be used. If you just double click on it, you can see there's a couple of different options here. I'm going to leave it on 25% for now, but you can set a fixed distance or a fractional distance in case you don't like percentages as much, and multiple divisions as well, if you want to include multiple marker points along there. But just with this checked, you can see when I start drawing this line here and I approach this object, it actually breaks this object. I no longer have the snap points that I might with smart points. I can turn those on obviously and get those happening there. But just if I leave that checked off, it actually puts a 25% marker from this corner obviously to this end here, and the inverse running this direction, indicated by the tiny arrows you can see there. So I could actually snap to 25% of this object. Now this might be great if you want to do say 33 1/3 or something like that, just if you want to break this object into thirds. I'm just going to do this as a quick example here, or if we want it to be really exact, depending on how we were feeling, because obviously that's the closest fraction Vectorworks gets to here. We could just type 1 in 3, which is the exact fraction. And you can see that's broken it into a third along here and on this edge as well. A little bit handy to know that's there. Obviously not everyone, and I as I said, forget it quite a lot. Smart edge is mainly only used in 3D. We might talk about it when we get there, but it's just about choosing the right edge for the job. And add a tangent, and once again this is a circular thing. Mathematicians might get into it, but it's basically pulling a tangent from a circle. I'll see if I can draw it here. It says that as I approach this circle from my current point here, this is the tangent where you can see it meets at a perfectly flat angle, I guess you'd call it. It's where the tangent of this circle, or the gradient of this circle, is the same as this line. So obviously we can create the most common thing you'll create with this, and if I turn my smart points back on, is the ice cream cone, where you know that these are going to meet perfectly. It might be useful in the future for you if you are creating a set which has some sort of shape involving circles. Obviously, in this example here, you can create quite a nice shape. But apart from that, I don't think you'll use it very often. As I said, my regular set looks something like this. Obviously smart points I find is a must, but if you want to not use it, that's okay. These ones here though are very handy to use. So we've finished learning about constraints. It's now time to start thinking about setting up our document. The first thing that we want to really do is get our space ready for our document. Obviously we've got some panels open at the moment. Now you might want to open a few more, you might want to open a few less. I think for basic starting this is a great space to be in. If you really need some more, under the palettes menu here you can turn on your toolsets, for example, if you need some documenting stuff. Some of your dimensions and notes are under there, and also your resource browser and navigation if you find yourself needing those, particularly for importing stuff. The rest of it is a little bit irrelevant for now, and once you get more advanced you can play with that. The other thing I would encourage you to do, only because for some of you these menus might seem a bit unfamiliar, and as I was encouraging you to use last time that we discussed this program, we were using the Spotlight Australia package. Now under your tools menu, under workspaces and Spotlight Australia, I would click on that and it might look a little bit more familiar. Some of the menus will juggle around. Obviously I'm going to have to close a few more of these and rearrange a few bits and pieces, but it's generally the same. It's mainly just the labels here, and the different versions here, just to run through them under the workspaces, they're just geared towards what you might need if you're fulfilling one of these different roles: an architect, a designer, fundamentals, landmark and spotlight. Some of you might decide one day to move to designer, but for now, just as a general term for theatrical and film purposes, spotlight is the best choice in my opinion for you guys. You'll also notice that we now have the spotlight menu up here. This is purely for lighting design should you wish to go into that, but it also has the architectural and machine design features if you're ever looking for those. Event planning is also something that we might get to later on in this session, but it's something that I suggest that you explore later on should you move into something that involves those. So jumping into our file menu here, under our document settings and our document preferences and our units. Document preferences, just as a quick overview, is mainly just visual and dimensioning styles. There's a few other things here like resolution. Should your computer be underperforming at the moment, if you're running on a slower MacBook for example or something like that, you might decide to turn down some of these resolution settings as well as altering them in your overall preferences file. Also if you need to turn on or off any of these, sometimes they might help with your visual styles. An important thing to check under here is your units, and if you have your computer set to US English as opposed to Australian English, you might find that you've by default found yourself in inches and feet. Often this is a common thing to happen. Just make sure you swap all of these over to square meters or millimeters depending on what your preferences are. Sorry. You can also choose to have a fractional rounding style or a decimal. And you can also choose here your decimal precision. This is something that people often forget about, but when using smaller things, if you are drawing, for example, our Lego project coming up, you will need to turn your decimal precision down, as it were, to, for example, 0.1, which will take all of your rounded values down slightly. Vectorworks will still accept values. If, for example, in your object info you were to type in 1.5, it will still accept that and draw it as 1.5, but if you attempt to read that number back at some point in the future, it will actually round up or down depending on that. So sometimes it's handy to turn these on. Obviously you don't really need to go to nano precision for the time being. So this concludes Lesson 1 Part A. At this point in time you should be quite familiar with creating basic shapes, moving objects, especially on the Cartesian plane, object editing through the Object Information panel, polylines and polygons, navigating around your page, rotation, mirroring and duplication, copy and pasting, and the basic document setup. Have a look at Lesson 2 or Part 1B if you want to have a look into addition, subtraction and intersection, the next three big components.